Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to What If Deku went to the support course part 2. Last time in the What If, Izuku tried his hardest in the sports festival in order to helpfully be taken into the hero course, but he got taken down by Todoroki during the 1v1s. And the gadgets Izuku created were rocket shoes, an expanding bow staff, tech glasses, and gloves that shoot high-pressured air. So now let's jump back into the what if. So we start out where the last part ended. So when Izuku was trapped in the block of ice, he was out. And when he melted out, he gave Todoroki a handshake, which made the crowd go wild. And since he didn't have one for all, he didn't get that injured, so he was able to get completely healed by Recovery Girl. And when he was done, he sat down and watched the rest of the 1v1s with Hatsume. So now we skip past the rest of the festival, with the results being the exact same as in the canon, with Bakugo coming in first, Todoroki in second, and Tokoyami came in third. But what's important happens during the award ceremony, after All Might gave the three their respective medals. He shouts,
"These three really gave it their all during this festival, and so did everyone else who participated, so let's give them all a round of applause."
And when the stadium stopped cheering, All Might started again.
But even though they didn't make it to the top three, there was one more student that deserved something special, and that person showed us today that even without a quirk, anyone can be a hero. So after some discussion with the staff of UA, Izuku Midoriya, welcome to the hero course.
And after the All Might speech, the crowd went wild, since that would make Izuku the first quirkless student in the hero course. So now we skip after the actual festival. Since Izuku accepted their deal to the hero course, he had to clear out his workbench, since he won't be there as much. But before Izuku got it completely cleared off, Power Loader came into the room, and he says he doesn't need to clear his bench. Izuku then asks why if he's being transferred, and Power Loader responds by saying since Izuku is quirkless, he can't just give up inventing things, or he'd be left behind. And in his mind, he will always be an honorary support course student, so he can continue to build during lunch and after school. So now we skip a week, and when it was the start of the day, Izuku was standing in front of Class 1A, and he was trying to ready himself. But while he was in the middle of this, Shinso walks right next to him, and he asks if Izuku is okay, which spooked Izuku. Then after a bit of talking, Shinso opens the door to Class 1A and walks in. Seeing this, Izuku got confused, but since he had to go there too, Izuku followed after Shinso. And when the two walked in, Aizawa was at the front of the class in his sleeping bags, since class hadn't started yet. But when he saw the two walk in, he got out of it. "Welcome both of you, and welcome to Class 1A. You did a great job in the sports festival, and that made us believe that you both have heroic potential, so make sure to do your best." And you may be wondering why Shinso was transferred into the hero course. It was because during the festival, the staff revisited Shinso and his quirk, and they decided to transfer him. And there were also 2 spaces open from Mineta getting kicked out and Sue being dead. So when class actually starts, Midnight walks into the room, and they are told that they will have to come up with hero names, and everyone's name will be the same, including Deku, since that's all he could think about when it was time for him to come up with his name. He wanted to show that Deku means you can do it, and the name Shinso went with is Inquiry. And when they all come up with hero names, Aizawa shows them on the board all the pros that want to hire them for the internship, and they were all warned ahead of time about the 2 news that can now be picked. And the picks are just as uneven as in the canon, with Todoroki and Bakugo having most of the offers. But they weren't the only 2 that wanted to be picked. Shinso and Izuku were both wanted just as much, since Shinso demonstrated how useful his quirk could be, and Izuku demonstrated how practical he can be. But after looking at the list, one of the offers caught Izuku's eye. It was the pro hero gang Orca. Since not only was he high on the hero list, he also has an interesting quirk that Izuku believes that he can learn to use via a new gadget. And the pro hero that Shinso went for was Miss Joke, since her quirk is so close to his, and he believes that he can learn to make it better with her help. So now it's time for me to describe both Izuku and Shinso's hero costumes. Izuku's is similar looking to his original costume, but his primary color is black with white lines, and the mask has lenses that are the same tech as his glasses, so he doesn't need to wear his glasses while in combat. And his mouse guard has a filter which will be able to block most gases. He also has a utility belt where he stores most of his tech. So now we move to Shinso. His hero costume looks similar to Aizawa's, which means it's a black jumpsuit with a utility belt, but he also has a mask, but in the mask there's a megaphone so his voice is now louder, and his weapons are 2 tonfas made out of hard wood. And days later, Class 1A went to their different agencies. And not only did Izuku bring his hero costume, he brought with him a bag full of his tools and metal. So now we skip to when Izuku makes it to Gang Orca's agency. And when he gets there, he is greeted by a group of Gang Orca psychics, who lead him to his temporary room. And when he gets all set up, he is taken to Gang Orca, who welcomes him to his agency. And he tells him what he will be doing at his agency, which is train with his sidekicks, go on patrols, and hopefully create a new gadget to help him in the future. But for the first day, he just did training with Gang Orca sidekicks. But after the training was done, Izuku came up with an idea for a gadget, based on Gang Orca's quirk. So he asked Gang Orca the next day if he could use him for some testing, which Gang Orca agrees to. And the testing was Orca would use his sonar as strong as he could, while Izuku would record the frequency, and after Izuku got the frequency, he was able to replicate it after a couple of days. So by the end of the internship, he was able to weaponize it by making small metallic cylinders with a string at the back, and when the string's pulled, it shoots out a powerful frequency out the front, and it's built so it only shoots the sound forward, and its radius is a couple of feet before it starts to lose power. And it's so strong that if you shot it point blank, it could knock someone unconscious. And the amount of containers Izuku created were 5, which he keeps on his utility belt. And he named his new gadget the Sound Bomb. But sadly, on the last day, news started to spread about another student dead. The person was found to be Tenya Ida, who presumably died from the hero killer, based on the fact he was found in an alley with another dead body. And the other body was found to be the pro hero native. And this put UA under fire, since that means that this would be the second student that died in 1 year. And to protect themselves, UA came up with an idea to do dorms, so the dorms happened much sooner than the original canon. And since they needed to build dorms, school was cancelled for the next couple of weeks. So now we skip a couple of weeks after class started again, so it's time for Class 1A's final exams. And the teams will be a bit different since some of the students are gone, with Bakugo with Tokuyama against Ectoplasm, Zero and Ojiro versus Power Loader, and now Midoriya and Shinso versus All Might. And everyone's score for the written exams will be around the same, and Shinso was able to get 10th place. So now we skip to when the physical exam starts. And the teams I just did besides Izuku and Shinso have already passed. So when Izuku and Shinso's exam began against All Might runs through the fake city, and in the process he was able to create a linear path to the exit. And to try to win easily, they tried to make All Might talk to Shinso, but no matter how much Shinso talked, All Might stayed quiet, and All Might was able to grab onto Shinso's leg and toss him into a nearby building. Izuku was going to catch him, but All Might grabbed him as well, and he threw him in the other direction. And by the time Izuku was able to catch his balance, Shinso had already crashed into the building's window, and he was in the process of getting back up. So Izuku rushed at All Might, and he shot him point blank with a sound bomb, and he was able to pull it off since Izuku hadn't shown anyone else the sound bomb, so it was a surprise to All Might. So at first it didn't seem to have that much of an effect, but after 5 seconds All Might tried to close his ears with his hands, but the sound was so strong that it was able to go through them. So seeing this as his last option, All Might punches Izuku square in the gut, as strong as he could, launching Izuku and the sound bomb away. Izuku when he landed picked himself up and flew to Shinso, and he picked him up and he brought him to a roof a couple of buildings away. They then tried to come up with a plan, and for the plan to work, Izuku gave Shinso 3 of his sound bombs as a last resort, since he was going to use himself as bait while Shinso runs to the exit. So Izuku then puts Shinso on the ground, who starts to run, while Izuku goes straight at All Might, who was running around the middle of the fake city trying to find the two. And when Izuku got to All Might, he tried to use his final sound bomb, but this time All Might was prepared, so he flicked his fingers at Izuku, launching back a couple of feet, and far away enough where the sound bomb didn't affect him. Izuku then grabs his staff and says extend 6, then he tries to use the shoot to launch himself at All Might, and with his staff he tried to do close combat, to distract All Might just a bit longer. But after some fighting, Izuku tried to use his staff to block a punch, but when All Might punched the staff, it broke in half, making the electricity shoot out from both parts. So Izuku, trying to make most of this, tried to use the staff to electrocute All Might, which he was able to do, but all it really did was sting a bit, and it wasn't strong enough to do any actual damage. So when all the electricity got used up, Izuku dropped both pieces of his staff, and he used his whole left hand to shoot a wave of air at All Might, pushing him back a couple of feet. Izuku then tried to fly away, but All Might flung himself at Izuku's back, just about breaking it. But before anything else could happen, they hear an alarm saying that the students have won, and when the two look at the exit, they see Shinso standing in the gateway. So we skip to the next day, and they are told who passed and who failed, and since Shinso was able to get to the gate, he passed. And even though Izuku was pinned down at the last second, he still passed since he wasn't expected to fight All Might one-on-one. So just the fact he was able to fight All Might for so long gave him enough points to pass. But before the people that failed can say anything, Aizawa continues to speak, saying even though they failed, they will be able to go to the summer camp, but they will have to do extra courses. And after class they wanted to go shopping, but since they were still in the dorms, they weren't allowed unless they asked. And when they asked Aizawa, he told them the school will buy all the things they will need for the camp, and if they need something specific, they will need to write it down and give it to them. So we skip a couple of days and it's time for summer camp to start, and they made Izuku bring all of his gadgets and tools. So we skip to when Class 1A gets to a cliff in the woods after a couple hours of driving, and it's there they meet the WWPC, who then create an avalanche and push the class off the cliff. Then they shout to make it to the camp as quickly as they can. And after hours in the woods fighting monsters made out of dirt, Class 1A was able to make it to the camp, with everyone tired, dirty, and covered in scratches. And the same things happened that night with Koda, so Izuku still finds about Koda's parents. So now we skip to the next day, and is when the actual training started. And the training Izuku did was fight students from Class 1B and A, along with Shinso, since they both need to learn how to fight people with many different quirks. But they only did that for a couple of hours at most, and the rest of the time was used for their specific things. So Shinso did the same thing with Koda, so he had to shout as loud as possible to see how far his quirk could affect people. And Izuku's project was he had to come up with and make a prototype for a gadget based on a quirk from a student, and he had to make one for every day. And the first day, Izuku asked Ochako if he could look at her fingers, and after a couple hours of testing, Izuku was able to get the information he needed. Then he started to create blueprints, and by the end of the day, he was able to make a prototype levitation device based on Ochako's fingertips. And the device was a small pink button, and the thing that hits the button will become weightless. But since he had to rush it, it could only make you weightless for only 10 seconds. So now let's skip to later that night after all the training was done, and Izuku noticed while eating that Koda wasn't there, so he went to go look for him with a plate of food, and eventually found Koda on a cliff. Koda and Izuku then talk about why Izuku is trying so hard to be a hero, even though he's quirkless, and he's just throwing his life away. Izuku then responds to this by saying, "Yes, I might be throwing my life away. Sure, I might. No, I am. Not as strong as literally everyone else in the department. But what I'm risking my life for is worth it. Saving people while having a smile on my face. Also, if I can become a hero, I can prove to everyone that quirkless doesn't mean worthless. So try as much as you want, Koda, but I'm not giving up on me or you." Izuku then puts the plate on the floor and flies back to the camp. So now we skip to the next day, and the next person Izuku chose was Kirishima, and the way he did that was by studying Kirishima's hardening, to see how he exactly hardens, and they used that information to create a prototype shield, that is normally a watch, but when he twists it, it grows into a fully grown shield that is big enough to protect him. And Izuku used Kirishima's hardening to make the shield stronger by making the shield kinda like Kirishima's skin, so it's very durable and dense, and just like Kirishima's skin it can cut as well. But the problem is that it can only take a couple of punches from a strong opponent before it starts to lose its density and it starts to dent and break. And when the day's training was over, the camp had a test of courage. And this time, Izuku was paired with Shinso, but before they were able to go through, the students that were outside the forest were able to tell that the forest was on fire. Then villains start to walk out of the forest, making the WWPC forced to fight the villains. Izuku was going to join them to help, but then he remembered about Koda, so he told Mandalay and Shinso. But when Shinso heard where Izuku was going, he told him to take him with him, since if there was a villain, his quirk could be useful. So then Izuku flies with Shinso in his arms, and when they get to the cliff, they see Koda face to face with a giant blonde villain. But before Koda got punched, Izuku dropped Shinso in front of the villain, and Shinso used a sound bomb, which stunned Muscular. So Shinso grabbed Koda and began to run, but after a couple of seconds, Muscular was able to orient himself, so he went to punch Shinso. But Izuku dropped himself in front of the fist, and he was able to protect himself with his new shield, but it created a huge dent in the shield. So to help, Shinso while running began to ask the villain some questions trying to brainwash him. But since the League knew about Shinso's quirk because of the festival, Muscular kept his mouth shut. Then Muscular started to barrage Izuku with punches, which Izuku was able to block with his shield, but after around 30 seconds, Izuku's shield was completely destroyed. And with his shield now broken, Izuku couldn't protect himself from the last punch, which flung him into the mountain. And after he got flung, he picked himself back up, and by this time, Shinso was out of both Izuku and Muscular's vision. But that didn't mean that he wasn't too far away, so Izuku knew he had to distract him for just a bit longer. So he then said extend 3, and then Izuku charged at Muscular, but his staff was only a distraction, because Izuku had both of his things from the camp. So when Izuku got close, he grabbed the weightless button from his pocket, and he was able to hit Muscular with it, making him weightless, which made him lose his momentum. So Izuku, making the most of these couple of seconds, readies his staff at Muscular, and he says extend 10, and while it was extending, he thrust his staff at Muscular, and since Muscular was weightless, it launched him at high speed, so when the 10 seconds were up, Muscular was somewhere far in the woods. Izuku wanted to take some time to rest, but he knew that Muscular was still pretty close, so he needed to get the 3 as far as possible. So he activated his shoes and he flew over the trees to try to find Shinso and Koda. And after around a minute of flying, he saw Shinso and Koda with Aizawa, so he landed. Aizawa then asked if Izuku is okay since he's bleeding from his head, but Izuku says that he's fine, but the villain they were fighting is still on the loose, so they will need to get out of there. Aizawa then tells Izuku that he's not ready yet, and that he should hide with some of his other classmates. But Izuku says that he's not done yet, and that he needs to help everyone else. And before anyone could do anything, Izuku flew off. Aizawa then tells Shinso to follow him, and to tell Mandalay a message. And after a couple of minutes, the two were able to make it back to the WWPC. And while Izuku got his gloves from his room, Shinso told Mandalay the message, which was Aizawa is allowing the students to fight. But since Muscular didn't talk, no one knows that the League is after Bakugo. So the two helped the pro heroes fight, the villains Magna and Spinner. And with them not knowing about the sound bombs, Izuku was able to launch one directly in front of Spinner. And while he was stunned, Izuku hit him in the head multiple times until he passed out, forcing him out of the fight. But before the fight could continue, Izuku sees Shinso just vanish into thin air, and where Shinso was standing, there was now a blue marble. So Izuku ran to go get it, but before he could reach it, another villain appeared and grabbed the marble. He then tipped his top hat and jumped over the trees. And seeing this, Izuku activates his shoes, and he flies himself as fast as he could at the villain. And when he got a clear shot, he shot a whole hand's worth of air at the villain, knocking him off course, and it made him fall to the ground. And when he landed, Izuku landed as well. And when he did, Izuku noticed Ochako knocked out, getting her blood drained by another villain. And when she saw Izuku, she ran away. Then the two fought, but after a bit of fighting, a wave of flames got shot at them. But Izuku was able to dodge it at the last second. And when he looks to see who shot it, he sees Todoroki, who then asks where Bakugo is. Then Mr. Compressed jumps onto a tree, and he shows the two all the marbles he had, which contained Tokoyami, Bakugo, and Shinso. Then he ran away. Izuku then tried to fly after him, but his shoes ran out of fuel, so the two ran through the trees to try to catch up to the villain. And after a bit of running, they make it to a clear field, with almost all the villains Izuku saw during the night. And Muscular is there since he wasn't knocked out, but he was flung somewhere else. And there was a portal right behind them, and they were starting to walk through, with Mr. Compressed just barely getting there. But when they saw the two, they stopped. Izuku then charged straight at Mr. Compressed, but Muscular stood right in front of him, and in response, Izuku gets out a sound bomb, and he pulls the string. But since Muscular was ready for it, he was able to power through it, and he punched Izuku in the gut, launching him into a nearby tree. And while this was going on, Todoroki tried to fire a wave of flames at Dabi, but Dabi fired a wave of flames as well, making the flames unable to hit each other. But after Muscular flung Izuku, he went after Todoroki, and he was able to punch him on the side while he was distracted, knocking him to the ground. But before anything else could happen to Todoroki, Izuku got back up, and he tried to attack Muscular with his staff, but he got his leg grabbed and he got flung again. And when he hit the tree, it almost knocked him out. He tried to get back up, but his body didn't have enough strength. Muscular was about to finish the two off, but Dabi stopped him, saying that reinforcements will arrive shortly, so they have to leave. So then the villains left with all 3 students. Then hours later, everyone that was injured were put in ambulances. And that's where I'm going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.